Rock and roll. Where would we be without it? After rock and roll exploded onto the scene, Americans couldn't get enough of the bluesy, guitar-driven hits. A new culture was created because of this music. It embraced rebellion against the accepted conventions of society and made many elders at the time nervous for the future. Needless to say, rock and roll changed how we see popular music. However, despite being the impetus for change, there are many negative aspects of the time that persisted in the world of rock and roll. The most unfortunate of these was the continued inequality that was created along racial lines in the rock and roll music industry. Rock and roll shaped many aspects of American culture. One of the most interesting things about the genre, though, was that the true creators were never truly credited. Rock and roll started primarily as rhythm and blues, and doo-wop performed nearly entirely by black artists, dubbed as race music very early on by white record producers. It was not popular in the mainstream culture and was even looked down upon. However, during the 50s and 60s, as the civil rights movement became into the forefront of society, black and white culture began to join together in small ways, most notably in music. White musicians began listening to previously taboo artists such as Big Mama Thornton, Chuck Berry, The Charms, and many more, and grew to appreciate the sound. However, admiration soon turned into appropriation, as more and more white artists began to copy this new music that had been around for decades. To white society, these white artists had created a new genre that picked up steam and soon exploded onto the mainstream. The genres of R&B and rock and roll remained separate because of the race of those performing them. While sounds were extremely similar, black artists got pushed into the R&B category and little chance to reclaim the sound that they had created as attention focused on white rock and roll artists. Rock and roll legends such as Elvis Presley and the Beatles were born out of the R&B sound, while the creators were primarily unknown. Whilst there was no shortage in ways in which rock and roll mirrored the racially segregated society he was born into, one of the most apparent ways was the difference in profits made by white and black musicians who were making very similar music. In fact, many of the songs that white musicians became famous for were not actually their own, but in fact covers written by African Americans. On many occasions, these covers made substantially more than the originals by black composers. Not only were black artists losing credit for their work here, but they were losing money as well. The following songs are an example of these inequalities.
Hearts made of stone will never break for the love you have for them. They just won't take. Hearts made of stone will never break for the love you have for them. They just won't take. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, been snooping on the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, been snooping on the door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna feed you no more. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine.
Unfortunately, African American musicians could do very little about this because speaking up would most likely jeopardize their careers. That didn't, however, stop artists like Chuck Berry from making indirect jabs at the issue. His song, Brown-Eyed Handsome Man, is full of subtle hints that indicate a disapproval of society. Now, it is also important to mention that this appropriation music did actually have some positive impacts. While older generations often responded negatively to the genre because of its roots in black culture, seen as dirty and unbecoming, a new way of thinking about race started to emerge because of this music. Younger white audience became more and more open to the idea of integration, as being black became seen as dangerous and cool, which, while still racist in a different way, was a step in the right direction. The rock and roll scene became a multicultural space, as many musicians refused to play venues that wanted segregated crowds. However, in the long term, black musicians lost out on a huge amount of profit that the genre created, while white musicians amassed incredible amounts of wealth. An example of this would be Elvis's net worth of nearly $300 million, all started by his one cover of an African American song. An entire generation of amazing black musicians are nearly forgotten, while white musicians are credited with their genre's creation. Rock and roll is one of the most well-loved genres of all time. It has deep roots in societal and racial history, but many people have not given credit where it's due. The original rock and roll created by black musicians was not accepted until it was appropriated by white musicians, pushing black musicians out of their own genre almost entirely. This example of cultural appropriation and racism in the music industry is still seen today. For example, in rap music, which was originally created by young black musicians coming out of the disco scene. As the genre gained popularity, white people began to appropriate the sound, similar to what happened during rock and roll. Rock and roll started the first advances of social integration, but could not fully commit due to racism at the time. This caused culture and credit to get lost in the mix, and many people, such as the black musicians of early rock and roll era, had amazing opportunities taken from them as a result.